About a month and a half ago, I took my finished GMC Savannah minibus out for the first time. I lived out of it full time for the whole duration of the trip and managed to travel through 10 states and do a lot of mountain biking in most of those states. My first stop was in early March. I spent a couple of nights at a trailhead in Mark Twain National Forest in Missouri. It was really cold and there wasn't a ton to do aside from riding gravel, but I had plans to meet friends down by Lake of the Ozarks that week, so I couldn't really leave the area. Unfortunately, the plans of course fell through, so I headed to my next stop, which was in Bentonville, Arkansas. For anyone who doesn't already know, Bentonville could be called the mountain bike capital of the United States, or at least the southern United States. The city has unreal mountain bike oriented infrastructure. I spent a long weekend there and mountain biked during the day and watched basketball during the night. Unfortunately, the trails were really busy, so I didn't get a chance to do much filming of my riding there as I didn't want to get in people's way. After Bentonville, I moved to a national forest just outside of a tiny New Mexico town. There, I parked on the side of the FSR and rode gravel fairly often. I even bagged a mountain summit, albeit a really short mountain. The stay there wasn't too long, it was just under a week. I planned for my next stop to be in Flagstaff, Arizona, but while I was in Arkansas, I learned that it was still very much winter there and not spring like the rest of the Southwest. My goal was to apply for a temporary job in Flagstaff until late May, but with still feet of snow around, I fled to Sedona for what I thought would just be a week or two at most. I did briefly go back up to Flagstaff later in April, but there was still a ton of snow, and the tourism department said that there was really no chance of me being able to camp there until late May. While I was in Sedona, I found some really good free campsites and I met some really cool people who also lived in vans, and I also found new people who I could ride mountain bikes with, which was a really nice welcome. I also got to see some really famous trails like the White Line and discover some new trails that were a lot of fun. I even tried sleeping at the trailhead one of the nights to no avail. Throughout the first 2 weeks in Sedona, all was well, and in the Flagstaff forecast was still way too cold for the snow to melt, so I decided I would try to work in Sedona. After applying at a few places with no callbacks, a few cracks did begin to show in Sedona. The first problem that happened had been going on the whole time I was there, but it did progressively get worse. And that problem was the cell service. When I first got there, it was early enough in the season that all the tourists in town would clog up the cell signal, so it would be really slow or almost unusable. But after 6 or so o'clock, they would all return to their rental homes and hotels, and the service would free back up so I could use the data at night. Unfortunately, as the season went on, more and more van lifers came, which meant the signal was always jammed up even at night because they were using it at night too, which meant the signal was always jammed up. And as an online student, that was really bad news. That ties into the second problem, which was how busy it got in Sedona. It was really easy to find a camp spot at first, but soon it got to the point where I would be really nervous to go out and get groceries in fear of not being able to find a suitable spot to park. The third most serious problem was the heat. Towards the end of my stay there, the temperatures inside the bus would get over 110 degrees Fahrenheit, which is something probably over 40 degrees Celsius. And that was just plain dangerous to me, especially with me going on long mountain bike rides daily. It only takes a little bit of dehydration to get in a hole that I can't dig myself out of. After talking to some Canadians I was on a bike ride with, they said they stopped in Fruita, Colorado on their way down to Sedona. So I took their advice and headed that way. After a beautiful but really slow and two-laney drive through Utah, I received a warm Colorado welcome in the form of a mouse infestation. I would receive a new mouse each night, but luckily the traps had a 100% success rate, and I did eventually learn to park away from the grass to avoid letting the mice get in. In Fruita, I rode every single trail in the system, which was a lot of work, but they were really fun trails. While Sedona tested my strength and technical ability, Fruita was the opposite, and it really pushed me to ride all out and do plenty of climbing. And now I can safely say race season will be really good for me this year. I applied to work at just about every business in Fruita, but most people seemed to like to work there, and all the places said they were full. So at that point, I had to decide, did I want to live and work in Grand Junction, which was right next door, but have to drive an hour and a half to mountain bike, or did I want to just come back home to the Midwest and work there while riding the trails that are no more than a K from my house? So I decided to come back home to earn more money than I would have been able to in Colorado. So what are my plans for the future then? Well, throughout the summer, I will for sure get many more camping trips in and try and keep the one video per week schedule going. I have close to 10 mountain bike races planned throughout Minnesota and Wisconsin, and maybe even a few in Iowa, although our local race series is in hiatus this year, so I'm not sure how that'll go. I will try to film as much as I can from these races and the trips that surround the races. And then to end my season, my goal is to race the amateur race at the UCI World Cup in Ligier, France. That's really all I have for this week. Thank you so much for following along the past 2 months if you have been. And if not, check out the past dozen or so videos on my channel or just look at my playlist called Southwest 2023. Thanks for watching, subscribe for more, and I'll see you next week.